Lecture 3 in text analysis is devoted to the discussion of linguosemiotic standards of textuality. In communicative linguistics, text is considered as a sequence of verbal utterances created by a locutionary act for illocutionary purposes. In other words, text is a sequence of sentences created by the writer or the speaker for extralinguistic purposes. It represents a functionally completed, meaningful communicative unit which fits both linguistic and non-linguistic context and which is characterized by the wholeness of its surface structure and underlying logical meaning. Text is organized according to the structural peculiarities of the given language. However, it is not sufficient for the text to be well formed semantically or structurally. Text is the sequence of only such sentences which can perform communicative function or participate in performing it. Hence, from the functional viewpoint, text can be formed of a verbal unit of any length, be it a sequence of thematically interrelated sentences, one simple sentence, a phrase, or even a single word, if it can perform communicative function. Accordingly, help, fire, no smoking, slow, danger, a literary narrative text, or a novel all represent different types of texts. We already know that text is language in use. It implies that text is a speech product, whereas language exists as a system of virtual signs that represent building material for the text. In other words, language system provides the writer and the speaker with abstract models by which they convert their ideas into a text. We also know that text as a communicative verbal unit has its peculiar characteristics. Textual characteristics are first of all predetermined by the whole set of such factors as the communicants, comprising both the writer or the speaker and the reader or the listener, the text with the help of which they interact, the place and time of the communication, the correspondence between textual world and the world of the reality, and so on. This means that while analyzing a text, we should focus on the features that completely differ from the lingual units proper. The set of all these and other similar extralinguistic characteristics constitute linguosemiotic standards of textuality that requires three-dimensional analysis of the text, focusing on its semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic aspects. And this model, only pragmatics, allows humans into the analysis of the text. Pragmatic approach to text analysis involves the study of how readers or listeners should make inferences about what is said in order to arrive at an interpretation of the writer's or the speaker's intended meaning. Inference being the listener's or the reader's use of additional background knowledge to make sense of what is not explicit in the text. In other words, this type of analysis explores how a great deal of information is implied in the text without its explication. Thus, in order to analyze text via its social-cultural context, we need to review briefly linguosemiotic standards of textuality. According to Bogrand and Dressler, a text is defined as a communicative occurrence which meets 7 standards of textuality. If any of these standards is not considered to have been satisfied, the text will not be communicative. Hence, non-communicative texts are treated as non-texts. These standards are the following. The first standard is called cohesion, and it concerns the ways in which the components of the surface structure, that is, the actual words we hear or see, are mutually connected within a sequence. In linguistic literature, cohesion is defined as the use of explicit linguistic devices to signal relations between sentences or parts of a text. There are 2 main types of cohesion, grammatical and lexical. Halidi and Hassan's work, Cohesion in English, is considered to be the most influential account of cohesion. These scholars identify 5 general categories of cohesive devices that create or signal coherence in texts. They are reference, ellipsis, substitution, conjunctions, and lexical cohesion. For example, wash and course 6 cooking apples, put them into a fireproof dish. This text is coherent because the word them in the second sentence clearly refers back to apples in the first one. By itself, either sentence would not mean the same as they do together, and in fact, the second sentence without its contextual links would not make much sense. A text may be cohesive without necessarily being coherent. Cohesion is determined by lexically and grammatically outward relationship between sentences, whereas coherence is based on logical and semantic relations. The second standard of textuality is coherence. According to Webster's New World Dictionary, coherence is the quality of being logically connected and intelligible. Coherence is defined as connectivity of underlying meaning of a text, while cohesion is the connectivity of its surface structure. Hence, both cohesion and coherence are text-centered notions designating operations that are directed at the textual materials. Bogrand and Dressler define coherence as continuity of senses. It concerns the ways in which components of the textual world, that is, the configuration of concepts and relations which underlie the surface text, are mutually accessible and relevant. A concept is definable as a configuration of knowledge, cognitive content, which can be recovered or activated with more or less unity and consistency in the mind. Relations are the links between concepts which appear together in a textual world, each link bearing a designation of the concept it connects to. Coherence is not a mere feature of text, but rather the outcome of cognitive processes and inferences made by text users. Reading a text is far more complex than creating links across sentence boundaries and pairing and chaining together items that are interrelated, referring to the same entity. Cohesion is only a guide to coherence, and coherence is something created by the reader in the act of reading the text. Coherence is the feeling that a text hangs together, that it makes sense, and it is not just a jumble of sentences. As McCarthy indicates, the sentences Clara loves potatoes, she was born in Ireland, are coherent only if the reader already shares stereotype, ethnic association between being Irish and loving potatoes. So, cohesion is only part of coherence in reading and writing, and indeed in spoken discourse too, as the same processes operate there. The cohesion of surface text and the underlying coherence of textual worlds are the most obvious standards of textuality. They indicate how the component elements of the text fit together and make sense. Even so, they cannot provide absolute borderlines between text and non-text in real communication. People can and do use texts which, for some various motives, do not seem fully cohesive and coherent. The attitudes of text users should therefore be included among the standards of textuality. A language configuration must be intended to be a text and accepted as such in order to be utilized in communicative interaction. These attitudes involve some tolerance toward disturbances of cohesion and coherence as long as the purposeful nature of the communication is upheld. The production and reception of text function as discourse actions relevant to some plan or goal. Accordingly, Bogrand and Dressler introduced the notion of intentionality as the third standard of textuality to subsume the intentions of text producers. In the most immediate sense of the term, the producer intends the language configuration under production to be a cohesive and coherent text. Some situations may place such limits on time and processing resources that this intention is not fully realized by the representation. For example, cohesion is lacking on occasion in conversation. In a wider sense of the term, intentionality designates all the ways in which text producers utilize text to pursue and fulfill their intentions. An extensive body of research has been devoted to intentions in various disciplines such as sociology, psychology, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. The function of text is seen somewhat differently in the several fields. Sociologists would explore the use of text in speech exchange systems where participants interact and allot speaking terms. Psychologists would emphasize the text producer's intention to guide the consciousness of the hearer. Philosophers have argued that a text producer who means something by a text intends the utterance of the text to produce some effect in an audience by means of the recognition of this intention. Artificial intelligence researchers are concerned with people's plans and goals in order to better analyze the meaning of the words whose subtlety lies in their intentions rather than in their physical manifestations, and so forth. The fourth standard of textuality is acceptability, which implies text receivers' attitude in communication. In the most immediate sense of the term, text receivers must accept a language configuration as a cohesive and coherent text capable of utilization. Like intentionality, acceptability includes a tolerance range of minor discontinuities or disturbances, provided the continuity can be restored by reasonable problem solving. In a wider sense of the term, acceptability would subsume acceptance as the active willingness to participate in a discourse and share a goal. Acceptance is thus an action in its own right, and entails entering into discourse interaction with all attendant consequences. With written texts, acceptability involves the reader's inferring activities that illustrate how text receivers support coherence by making their own contributions to the sense of the text. If acceptability is restricted, communication can be diverted. It is therefore taken as a signal of non-cooperation if a text receiver raises questions about acceptability when the text producer's intentionality is obviously in effect. The fifth standard of textuality is informativity. Linguists use the term informativity to designate the extent to which a presentation is new or unexpected for text receivers. Every text is at least somewhat informative. No matter how predictable form and content may be, there will always be a few variable occurrences that cannot be entirely foreseen. Particularly low informativity of the text is likely to be disturbing, causing boredom or even rejection of the text. A considerable contribution to the study of this textual category was made by those Czech scholars who belonged to the Prague linguistic school. They focused on the functional, that communicative informative aspect of language. Czech linguists Danish, Firbas, and others worked out a theory known as functional sentence perspective that formed the cognitive basis for the communicative development of the text and showed how the semantic and syntactic structures of the sentence function in fulfilling the communicative purpose intended for the sentence. They disclosed that the relation of thoughts to each other and mental processes underlie the informational development of the text and affect the arrangement of words in sentences and text. In other words, they succeeded to uncover the organizing principles in language that account for the ordering of information in discourse beyond the level of the sentence. According to this theory, each sentence functionally proceeds from the previous one, pushing the information from the known or given information called the theme to the actual new information called the rime. Mathesius, writing in the 1930s, defines the term theme under two concepts. One, as the starting point of the utterance, that which is known or at least is obvious in the given situation and from which the speaker proceeds, and the other as the foundation of the utterance, as something that is being spoken about in the sentence. Accordingly, rime is what the speaker says about or in regard to this theme, the starting point of the utterance. Theme is therefore something that can be logically gathered from the previous context, while rime expresses something unknown from the previous context, something new that pushes the message forward. Theme-rime distribution of information shows clearly that it's impossible to limit linguistic analysis to sentence structure, that functional analysis of lingual units require a textual level. Scholars focus on the importance of these themes and topics in text building, claiming that the information that is contained within the themes of the various sentences of a passage correlates with the method of development of the passage. The semantic organization of the text is closely connected with its coherence or connectivity. A text is defined as text largely in terms of its semantic coherence. However, it is useful to remember that texts are not always perfect, that they not only display coherence to an uneven degree, but some may be characterized as discontinuous. The reason for less than optimal coherence may be that the speaker or the writer is simply not controlling the mass of new information that is successively accumulated in the text as it unfolds. This mass of information is mostly so extensive that the speaker or the writer necessarily makes a choice, and this choice, as Danish claims, is determined directly or indirectly by the selection of utterance theme. Danish's basic assumption is that text connexity is represented, among other things, by semantic progression. By this, he means the choice and ordering of utterance themes by their mutual contamination and hierarchy, as well as their relation to the hyperthemes of the superior text units, such as a paragraph, chapter, etc., to the whole text and to the situation. As Danish indicates, semantic progression might be viewed as the skeleton of the plot. The sixth standard of textuality is situationality, and it concerns the factors which make a text relevant to a situation of occurrence. The sense and the use of the text are decided via the situation. Situationality even affects the means of cohesion. Bogrand and Dressler illustrate this textual standard on the example of the following text: slow children at play. This text can be interpreted in two ways, according to the situation where it is represented. Somewhat might conceivably construe it as a notice about slow children who are at play, so that unflattering conclusions should be drawn about the children's intelligence and physical fitness. This note would look quite natural somewhere near a sanatorium or some medical institution. But in the street, where it represents a road sign, the more likely reaction would be to divide the text into slow and children at play, and as a result, drivers would reduce speed to avoid endangering the playing children. It is far more reasonable to assume that slow is a request to reduce speed rather than an announcement of the children's mental and physical deficiencies. Pedestrians can tell that the text is not relevant for themselves because their speed would not endanger anyone. In this manner, the sense and use of the text are decided via the situation. The seventh and the last standard of textuality is intertextuality. Bogrand and Dressler introduced the term intertextuality in text linguistics in order to subsume the ways in which the production and reception of the text of a given text depend upon the participant's knowledge of other texts. This knowledge can be applied by a process describable in terms of mediation. The greater the expanse of time and of processing activities between the use of the current text and the use of previously encountered text, the greater the mediation. For instance, a driver who has seen the road sign about slowing down is likely to see another one further down the road, such as resume speed. One cannot resume something unless one was doing it at an earlier time and then stopped doing it for some reason. So, it is clear that the sense and the relevance of these texts presented as road signs are interdependent and therefore intertextual. Intertextuality is found in mixed types of text which combine the features of different functional semantic types of text, such as descriptive, narrative, or argumentative text. And finally, the main issue in intertextuality is text illusion, the ways people use or refer to well-known texts. In principle, a text producer can draw upon any available text, but in practice, well-known texts are more suitable as being more readily accessible to the receiver audience. Thus, we have given a brief review of standards of textuality that are required for the analysis of text in its social-cultural context of discourse. That's all for this lecture. See the list of references.